There we go. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. We are continuing in the stories of 1 Samuel. So today we're covering 1 Samuel 4, 5, and 6 because it's one big story, and I thought we should discuss the whole story together. We are taking a little bit of a break from Samuel himself. If you remember, last week we discussed Samuel's call story. But we are taking a little bit of an interlude to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. We kind of get a wrap up of Eli's family and how his family has an untimely demise. But there's this kind of funny story about the Ark of the Covenant getting captured. And what does it actually mean if the Israelites lose the most holy object in their religion? So before we get started, any initial thoughts on this story, this kind of interlude about the Ark getting captured and then returned?
Well, it was familiar from my Sunday school days, but I certainly don't remember all the ins and outs and the details of the story. So I was glad to have read it.
Oh, that's fun to hear that this is a Sunday school story.
Yes.
Okay.
Or it was for me.
Uh-huh.
Joe.
Yeah.
Well, after last week, I had something I wanted to say, but it seemed like we were so upbeat on Samuel that I didn't want to bring it up, and so Joanne's poking me. And the issue is that I thought there was a message here that the fact that Eli had to pay for his reluctance to follow the law. That was a pretty good message again, telling us about the importance of accountability. And I didn't want to bring it up because we're already on to more exciting and upbeat.
Yeah, but almost in the same vein, the two sons that end up getting or dying or getting killed, are they the same two that supposedly misbehaved and really are responsible for Eli's current situation? Yeah, well, here they are still going off to get the ark and bring it back. They haven't certainly lost any status at all, to this point at least, other than they get killed.
Yeah. So we can, I mean, I love the word that you used, Gary, of accountability.
Yeah, because it's not a Bible word, but it's,
So we can, because Eli's family story kind of wraps up here, we can talk about the accountability of his sons and who actually pays the price for their misbehavior and kind of what today we would understand, but also like what would the ancient world understand about this kind of situation? Because their view of parent and child relationship is different, and so accountability looks a little different. But I like that word, so I wrote it down. So we'll definitely hit that when we talk about his sons and what happens.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Any other initial thoughts, or should we jump into the text? Let's jump in then. So, once again, I said read 4. This is another case where if you look, the first verse of chapter 1 starts kind of with the previous text. This is when I have beef with the person who, or the people who numbered our scriptures, because you can just see they didn't fully understand where the breaks should be. So if you start at the first sentence of kind of the Ark capture story, we find out that the Philistines are mustering war against Israel. And I did a little bit of reading into it this morning because I was curious as to when did the Philistines arrive? Because as I've mentioned before, the Philistines are Greek. And if they're Greek, that means they're not actually native to this area.
Oh,
They are coming into the area, not dissimilarly to the way that the Israelites have kind of come into this area. And it turns out the Philistines arrived about the same time that the Israelites start making their campaign with Joshua. So these two groups actually arrive in the in this region at around the same time, which is why they are constantly trying to duke it out with each other, because they are coming from opposite directions and they're meeting in the middle, and both of them want this area and both of them are kind of trying to move in. So tried and true to the way I do things, I have maps just because I was trying to understand, this was partly to help me understand the Philistines. So this is the map that we've discussed before of the 12 tribes, kind of as it's laid out in scripture when it talks about, well, the tribe of Judah goes from this city to this city, and Reuben goes from this city to this city. They've mapped it out, and this is where they think more or less the 12 tribes landed, except for the fact that this doesn't account for the Philistines. And so you kind of you have to Google other things to see what the maps are. Ooh, that's not the map I want. This is the map I want. This is more like what they were probably dealing with at the time of this text. So you can see that the Israelites have a lot of the area in and around the Jordan, but the Philistines have moved in on the coast because they were a seafaring culture. We've talked about before, they had the superior technology. While Israel is still kind of in the Iron Age, the Philistines are in the Bronze Age. So they have better weapons, they have better metals, they are considered more urbanite and sophisticated. Oh. So any questions of kind of the situation that we have set up of two groups that have kind of moved into the area? They've kind of taken over the local culture, and now they're kind of meeting and clashing and trying to figure out where the boundary between their two civilizations is going to be. All right. So, actually, we can get to it in a moment, or when we get to chapter 5, because the Ark of the Covenant's going to go on a grand tour. I have another map that shows where all the cities are. I just kind of wanted you to see the general layout of where these two cultures are clashing.
Mhm.
And so, Israel is kind of set up more or less. They still don't have a king. We find out later that Eli has been functioning as one of the judges for their leadership. At any rate, the Philistines muster for war, and they go against Israel, and they go out against them, and as expected, Israel's not doing well. They can't compete basically with the superior technology of the Philistines. And so, of course, the elders of the camps are having questions. Why is this happening? Has God abandoned us? And then they get the idea of, well, what if we bring God to the battlefield? So they have the idea to bring the Ark of the Covenant to the battlefield itself. Which, if you remember, the Ark of the Covenant is literally considered the place where God is physically standing. So their idea is, we're going to bring it out from the tabernacle, we're going to put it on our shoulders, and we're literally going to carry our God. And when they use the term the God of hosts, the heavenly host, are considered God's army. So we're going to bring God and the heavenly host to the battlefield, and this is going to improve our chances of winning against the Philistines because our warrior God is with us. So what do you think of this plan? You're fighting against a superior civilization, so you're going to bring your holiest object in hopes that God will help you.
It sort of sounds reasonable to the Israelites. If you look at their history, God has led them out of Egypt. God has promised the holy land to them and given it to them. Everything's going along according to God's plan. So if they just get him to the war field, he ought to be able to take care of that.
Yeah, but he hasn't directed them in this. He hasn't said he was going to. So I would assume that he wasn't on board.
Okay.
That's not a little
Yeah, Mary Ellen?
blasphemous, I guess, to say that, but
Okay.
it wasn't his idea. So it's
Yeah.
a little risky.
Okay. But yeah, Mary Ellen?
I see it as an act of desperation, where they have acknowledged that they alone cannot win. And so desperately, what other forces do we have? Well, we have our God, and that, that's our last move, that, we bring him into the battlefield, and he will help us win. Their faith was very strong. He was going to help us win. But I do see it as desperation.
Okay.
Yeah. And certainly God didn't help them in that first battle. They lost 4,000 men. What makes them think simply by moving God closer to the battle line, the results are going to be better?
Yeah, Helen?
And it doesn't sound like they asked God's opinion of all this before they even started. I think that if they had asked him, and if they'd find out whether he was in favor of that or not.
Yeah, I mean, you all have picked out some of the key, like the interesting conundrums in this situation. Because on the one hand, like there's an act of extreme faithfulness where like the people they believe in their God and that their God will help them. There's like one side of it where it's these people are true believers. On the other hand, yeah, 100%, they're in desperation mode. And like they're turning to God and they believe God's going to show up, but also pulling the holiest object imaginable to the battlefield, that's desperate. But on the other side, like Helen, you said they didn't ask God. That's a lot of the times where like God shows up, or like like if you think of Jericho or Egypt, God was leading the charge and they had like God told them what to do. This is one where it's like it's worked before, it can work again, and they just do it. And so you have all of these interesting forces of like, does God actually want to be there? We don't know. This plan just seems hatched by humans, but it's hatched by humans out of like faithfulness and belief, and it's interesting. But Clay, I saw your hand.
Well, they knew that, their God helped them out in other places. And even the Philistines acknowledge that, this is, although they use the word gods instead of God, but this is the God that did all this stuff in Egypt. And, maybe that's what the Israelites were thinking, was that they're just going to this will just strike down all the Philistines and we won't have to worry about them. And yet, alternately, when they capture the ark, things start going wrong for the Philistines. So, it's kind of a mixed bag of good and bad for the Israelites, because the ark gets captured, but having possession of the ark isn't good for the Philistines. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Gary.
I wonder if there's any connection to the fact that Eli's sons were in charge and carrying the covenant, and the fact that once they were dead, the tide changed.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that brings in some of these other elements here, which is interesting. This is one where what happens when you're close to the ark is not necessarily consistent throughout scripture. Because if you think about all of the ritual sacrifices that the people needed to do when they were in the wilderness just to be in proximity, like there are stories of people getting too close to the ark and just burning alive. And here they are just hauling it out to the battlefield where people are like, one of the big things that you're not supposed to do is touch a dead body. And that is like what as we've talked before, that they view sin as kind of like this like substance that gets on you and you need to be ritually clean of it. One of the big things that puts that like spiritual plaque on you is dead bodies, and you're just gonna haul out this holy object that can burn people alive all around a bunch of dead bodies. That's actually a very bad idea if what they believe is true. At the same time, they're 100%. One of the key parts of this story is that the two priestly sons that are kind of doing their own thing and not really obeying the law, they're the ones hauling it out. And so they ask, can we, like, I would assume there's a request process that these two sons aren't just like on the battlefield willy-nilly, but they send someone to Shiloh saying, hey, can we bring the ark? And of course, these two sons are like, yeah, sure. And they haul it out to the battlefield. And so this brings us to the question of the sons' eventual fates. And so the Israelites do not win this battle. Their hope that the God will fight for them in the way that they're expecting. I think there's a difference of expectations and God's plan here. That's my personal opinion. But their expectations is we have a warrior God. God can do miracles. We're going to haul God out to the battlefield and everything's going to be okay. And instead, they lose the battle. But the prophecy that God had already sent multiple times to Eli comes true in that Eli's sons die in battle. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, not only do they lose the battle, this time they lose 30,000 warriors, not 4,000 like they did in the first one. This thing is even bigger and worse for the Israelites than the first one was. And maybe the only good things are they got rid of Eli's two sons, and eventually, of course, they got rid of Eli too.
Mm-hmm. So why is it that you will, or do you all have any thoughts of why they lose this battle? Because theoretically, I mean, in one thought, like we were going down the one train of thought, like they're trying to be faithful, they believe in their God. Why did God let them lose? Is this purely punishment for participating with these two corrupt, like does 40,000 or what 30,000 people get punished for these two bad priests, or is this just the way it is? And
Well, the Israelites, though, sort of took things into their own hands and tried to use God, without asking his permission or doing anything, apparently. They just got this bright idea. We haul God up close to the line and we're going to win. And God says, no, you're not.
I like what you said. God's not a tool. It's not just like you can whip out your Swiss Army God and
Right, yeah.
God.
Other thoughts on why God kind of allowed this to happen, allowed them to lose?
Well, they started out on a kind of a bad premise. And if they had done it right, maybe he could have helped them. But if they want to go ahead on their own, just like us, we want to go ahead on our own. We don't want to sometimes do what God wants us to do. So, and same with the Israelites. They didn't want to do it God's way. They wanted to do it their way. And so the bad premise, I think God didn't feel like helping them at that point. They didn't ask him.
Okay. So it's one of those that you see almost, or using the word that Gary used, accountability. It's one of those, it almost feels like since you went along with bad leadership, the people pay the price, and that's the accountability of like, hey, you still went along with this bad idea, so here's the price tag for it.
Yeah.
How does Samuel fit into the timeline on this? They just abruptly go from Samuel to this. He hasn't started to really taking control of how things go. Did he?
No, so we don't really know Samuel's age at this point.
But
This
does say-
because the last chapter kind of ends with, and Samuel continued and like over time got famous. We don't know where in the time scale this happens.
Okay.
My guess is we might find out a little bit more details in chapter 7 when we start continuing on in the story and actually figure out, or like, he's probably older than he was, but he's not yet in power. Eli will hold on to power until the point where he passes away.
A prophet, it says.
So notably, Samuel, prophet and priest are two different vocations. If Samuel does not have the lineage to be a priest, so that puts him in like the prophet category. So he can't really fill the same role in the same ritualistic way, but it allows him to do other things. So we will see that. So Samuel is kind of just not in this story. This is just concluding Eli's story.
Okay.
And so we have the two sons that pass away after the ark is captured. Which means those sons' plans didn't go as planned, but the prophecy came true, which one of the other lines of thinking is God was just like, the humans had this idea of like, we're going to bring God to the battlefield, and God's like, great, I can fulfill my plans. You're not going to like it, but like God was actually using this and had planned for like kind of in that foresight, like God kind of already knew this was going to happen. So God didn't stop it, God didn't approve it, but this was a means to an end of getting rid of that line of people. But rewinding, so let's talk about the death of Eli, and then we're going to talk about the Philistines' response. So one of the people from the battlefield splits, flees, runs to Shiloh, where Eli is, and Eli hears about it, and evidently he's sitting there and his heart is trembling because of the Ark of the Covenant, which sounds like he was not on board with the plan to take the Ark away, because he is deathly afraid. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
He could have been on board, but still be afraid of what happened.
True, fair. Yeah, fair point.
Okay.
So he hears the noise of a lot of commotion, of people fleeing, screaming, all of that jazz. And he asks, what happened? We get that he is very old, 98 years old, can't really see. Tell me what's happening. And the person says, I've just come from the battlefield. How did it go? Well, Israel is fleeing. The ark has been captured. Your sons are dead. Which is kind of your worst case scenario.
It wasn't a good day.
No. So Eli basically falls over backwards. We get the description. He falls backwards. He breaks his neck because he is old and heavy. So evidently Eli is quite heavy set. So Anyway, so Eli basically falls and dies from the news of his sons being killed on the battlefield. And so in one day, both Eli and his sons are out of the picture. And we get the last little bit that he has a daughter-in-law who is pregnant and she goes into labor. It sounds like labor is hard, although it doesn't actually say she dies from labor pains, which is good, but she still gives that son theoretically a very depressing name. The glory of God has departed from Israel. That translation is a little bit, it's like, where is the glory? Or alas, the glory. It's a lament about the glory of God. So that is to say, Eli's lineage is not completely wiped off the earth, but the sons and Eli have had theoretically their punishment. And so what do we think about this accountability? Like, is Eli held accountable for his son's actions? Does his son's actions reflect on his actions? Do we like the thought of parents being punished for the sins of their children?
No, I don't like it.
Well, obviously Eli left his sons in positions of authority, because after all, they had permission to go haul the Ark of the Covenant and take it down to the battlefield. So nothing bad had happened to the sons, apparently, for their bad behavior, at least to that point. And Eli's already been told by God that, his lineage is not going to make it. And he's going to be in trouble eventually, and be punished.
Yeah, it took a while. It seemed to me like it took a while for that to happen.
So where is thinking about it morally, I feel like there's a limited culpability for, like, when you're, how much are you responsible for how your children develop? Are you 100% responsible for their development, or are they their own people and get to make their own mistakes? And when are you responsible?
I think sometimes you have a very difficult child that can't seem to work it out. I have friends who had a son who was kind of like that. Only they did everything. I mean, they were good parents. The older son was great. The younger son just did all kinds of terrible things and ended up dying young. But, you wonder, how do you manage a child that's so difficult?
But do we really know that the two boys were that difficult? I mean, he may have just been lax and let them off stealing the good meat or whatever, however you want to express it. And they may have been young enough to know better, because they've been hanging around the temple, the area all their lives, I assume. Oh.
I think it's always a question of nurture and nature, and there's a bit where it's always both, where it's never that's why I'm always curious about the combination of nurture and nature, because one thing I've noticed is sometimes there's a personality mismatch between parents and children, and sometimes parents just don't have the personality to parent a particular type of child. Like, if a child has just a very different disposition than a parent, it can be very hard to bridge that gap. Which is, once again, when sometimes, like, nurture and nature kind of have this weird tie together. And sometimes we want to blame spoiled children on parents that are not parenting. And then I've seen good parents and the children just has something else going on. And then there's other times where it seems like the parents did spoil the child and you're questioning, where did you not parent? Yeah, Larry?
Well, you know, if you're a believer mainly in nature, you know, anybody can get a bad apple, you know. But if you're more nurture, well, anybody can get one bad apple. But when you get two bad apples, you know, that's sort of shifting things a little bit. There must have been some nurturing problems along there.
And of course, at that time, they weren't aware of nature and nurture. And
No.
they probably, with their culture, would have blamed the parents for their children. I think that's the only thing they could blame it on. They didn't know of other things to put forth. I think that in their case, they blamed him. And it could be that it was his fault. I mean, it certainly reads like that. That he was at fault in his raising of his boys. And it's very possible that's the way it was.
So this is one of those where you can read some of the first century biases on their ideas of children kind of get written into the text. And so 100%, this is a very hierarchical culture. And the more hierarchical you are, the more that parents become responsible for the behavior of their children. And because it assumes that if you are at the head of the household, you correct bad behavior and you create good or bad children, which is why Eli is punished. And notably, the grandchild of Eli is not punished because the child is not being punished for the father's sins. And so the thought is, take away the father and the newborn son will be okay. So that's just a little bit of like how they are viewing this. So in this culture, because Eli is the patriarch, he is assumed to be responsible for everyone underneath him. Today, we know a little bit more about human psychology and know that that's probably not fully the case, but it probably had something to do with it. So let's talk about the Philistines and the grand tour, the world tour of the Ark of the Covenant. So the Philistines' first response when they hear, oh no, they just hauled the Ark of the Covenant out, evidently they know the stories. At least in the text, they know the stories. This may be apocryphal, but the Philistines go, oh no, what are we gonna do? This is a scary gods. Clay, you picked it up that they are using plurals. They assume that there is multiple gods because they are in a polytheistic culture. Polytheism is the norm, and so they think there's many gods coming to the battlefield. However, the Ark of the Covenant rolls up, and their plan is fight like hell, boys. We don't want to be slaves to them. We're still going to give it our best shot.
Oh, that's really awful.
So they give it the good old try, and they succeed in the end. Yeah, Larry.
Well, it makes a statement that they say the Philistines are told, you don't want to become slaves to the Hebrews as you were to them. Now, when were the Philistines ever slaves to the Israelites? I forget which.
I believe that phrase implies that the Philistines had taken Hebrew slaves.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so because there's probably a border war, they had been taking Hebrew people as slaves, or it could be an idea that since the Philistines had arrived in this area, they may be referencing that they had enslaved some of the people that were there when they arrived, which may have been Hebrew people, but not Israelite people.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so they end up being able to win. Their good old try was try enough, and God decided that, the text kind of assumes that God lets them win. And then because it's the spoils of war, the Ark of the Covenant, it's covered in gold. So they're like, oh, sweet, we have this cool gold box. We're gonna take it and we're gonna put it in our temple. Now they keep talking about the house of Dagon. And that Dagon, did a little bit of reading into it. Dagon is not a Greek god, not a Philistine god. This is actually a Syrian god.
Oh, really? Huh.
And the images we have is kind of a mermaid man, that looks like Babylonian inspired, Mesopotamian in general, but we have this fishtail guy with the little hat. Some other artwork with some seemingly Egyptian inspiration. Anyways, this is the god Dagon.
Okay.
What is assumed that the archaeological evidence does not quite support this, but when the Philistines moved in, they didn't destroy the temple. My notes are saying that the Philistines may have just taken over a pre-existing temple, and because they're a polytheistic culture, they just kind of added Dagon into the mix. But the Dagon relates more to like the Enuma Elish and things that are farther east than the Philistines. At any rate, they bring him into the house of Dagon, and there's this whole interaction between them placing the ark there, coming back the next morning, and Dagon's face down. And so that they put the fish guy back up on the pedestal, and they're like, okay, stay there, and wake up the next morning once again. Dagon is face down towards the Ark of the Covenant. This time, his hands are snapped off and found at the threshold of the door. Or was it, let's see. Oh, his head is also gone. His head is gone and his hands are gone. So not only did he fall down and kind of got his dismembered. And so they decide that maybe it's not a good idea to keep the Ark of the Covenant here. And then they keep bringing it to towns, and people are getting sick every town that the Ark of the Covenant is in. They're getting these boils, they're getting sick, and they're like, no, move the Ark of the Covenant to the next town over, until they realize we don't want to keep this. This seems to be a cursed item. This god does seem to be active and is not happy that we have him. So what do you think of this interaction of both the god falling down and being broken to pieces, and then city after city falling victim to plague?
Well, it makes you think God must be behind these actions. I mean, otherwise, why did they occur? And why now is God suddenly active? Where was he back on the battlefield? You know, why wasn't he helping them before? Now all of a sudden he is, but it's a different sort of thing. The way he's approached it is different. So
he was protesting, I think, what they did.
So what do you think? Why is God acting now and didn't act on the battlefield?
I don't know. If he acted on the battlefield, the only thing he's doing is he's raising havoc in their army. But here he's raising havoc in the general populace. It's all the people are getting tumors and all the people are getting sick. It's not just a matter of warfare. It's a matter of the entire culture and population being punished now.
I think also he felt that the Philistines were not his people. He wanted to be back with his own people, the Israelites. are God's people. And that's where he belongs. So he was causing problems for the Philistines, so they wouldn't want to keep him, that he'd eventually go back because they wanted to get rid of him. And he'd get back with his own people.
There's almost a sense that like God needed to teach the Israel, or if not the whole Israelite people, God needed to teach Eli and his family a lesson, but that didn't mean that God planned on leaving the people. It's just like, oh, you needed to learn a lesson. You've learned the lesson and I'm captured. So now I need to make my way back home. That's the impression that I personally got, is that, okay, Eli and his family are taken care of. Oh no, but I'm gonna stoke some fear of my people in this neighboring tribe so they stop attacking them. And kind of, it's in a way biological warfare. I'm gonna make you all afraid to attack my people. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, when you have two armies meeting and clashing and fighting, you have the generals and you have all of the people up there higher up making all the decisions. But when you take this ark into the city and all of a sudden the people are suffering themselves, they aren't going to support any future army clashes between the two armies. They're not going to support their army being used to fight any longer with the Israelites because their personal suffering is too much.
Yeah, it's one of those of, oh, you want us to attack those people? No. And it's like almost a deterrent. God's creating a deterrent for attacking them. So
Kind
here,
of show consequences are.
okay. Yeah, did I see a hand, Gary?
Yeah. Do we know that it was God that was causing this trouble? I'm trying to see whether there's any place here that said God did this or God did that. I wonder if it might have been the third column or a group of terrorists that were just trying to separate the Israeli or Jews from the Palestinians.
So in the text, the implication is yes, that God is doing this because God works God is using war tactics that God has used before. God caused boils in Egypt, so God's just causing boils in this area. So the assumption is God is doing this.
Okay, thank you.
However, the plot thickens when they make when they decide to give it up. The leadership of the Philistines says, okay, we messed up. We shouldn't have taken their God. Their God's mad at us. So they create a plan to basically, or they want to do a guilt offering. So the plan is we're going to give them gold.
Just a second.
Which is the spoils of war. So they load a brand new cart. We're going to take a brand new, newly built cart. We're going to fill it of gold, specifically 5 gold tumors, big lumps of gold, and 5 gold mice to represent the 5 towns or leadership, or both of these are representative of the Philistine like cities and villages. And then we're going to hitch it to a cow that has never been used before. This is for 2 purposes. Number 1, it is ritually clean. That if you are going to make a guilt offering, you need to use ritually clean items. Therefore, new cart, new cow. The other thing is there's like a test involved that if we hitch this cart to the cow and it goes directly back to the Israelites, we know that their God was the reason this was happening. And if it just kind of like wanders about and like walks willy-nilly, we know that this is just happenstance. So that's kind of the proof that this was God doing it, is that the cow makes a beeline back for the Israelite towns. And then when it arrives, the Israelites are like, yay, the Ark of the Covenant's back. And they destroy the cart to build an altar, and they sacrifice the cow kind of on the Philistines' behalf. So the Israelites do the sacrifice in the way that their God prescribes it, rather than the Philistines trying to mimic their thing. They kind of send the offering ahead saying, hey, we're sorry, here's the stuff for a sacrifice, and here's your God back. The interesting detail, though, is the fact that they send tumors and mice, which lead historians to believe what was actually happening was the bubonic plague was spreading. And what may have happened was someone was carrying the bubonic plague, and so when they captured the ark, they brought the bubonic plague to their town. And bubonic plague spreads not by mice, but the fleas on the mice. And so if they had the fleas on them, as they rotated the ark from town to town, they were actually effectively spreading bubonic plague to all of their towns. But when they burned the cart, they would have burned any bubonic plague lice, and therefore it did not spread to the Israelites.
Oh,
So there's your scientific explanation for this seemingly judgment of God, is it may have just been bubonic plague, but in the text, it was God spreading boils.
Interesting.
So, stepping back from the historical answer of bubonic plague, but looking at the text as as like a piece of literature, as understanding it in the idea of the text, what do you think of the plan of, we're going to load a guilt offering up on a cart, and we're just going to let the cow walk, see where it goes, and if it goes home, we know that we're safe, and they'll do the sacrifice on our behalf? Good plan?
Looks that way.
Well, it worked.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, everybody was happy. The Philistines are happy. They got rid of the plague. The Israelites are happy. They got their God back. And God's happy because he got rid of Eli and his 2 sons.
Right. Which is, so here's the question at the end of the story. Was this God's plan all along, or was God just rolling with it the whole time?
Yeah.
it's hard to think of God rolling with it.
Right.
No,
but there's like the question of like, why did God allow us to lose the battle? Did God have them lose the battle to strike fear in the Philistines' heart eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, if God had allowed the Israelites to win the battle, that would have taken care of the Philistines right then and there.
But would the Philistines gathered their troops and attacked 6 months later, would they have been at it again? So what are kind of setting us, or I'll show you a map, and then I have a question that kind of sets us up for next week's discussion. So I said I would show you the map of what the travels of the Ark of the Covenant. So it starts over here in Shiloh. To zoom out, can I zoom out? This is kind of a map of this area right here. So Jerusalem, which is not set up as an Israelite city yet, it is still a pagan city. It is down here. So we're north of Jerusalem. Shiloh will become the capital of what is like Samaria. So this is in the lower, it's kind of upper midsection. Anyways, So it starts off, this is where the shrine is. And so the battle is between the Philistine city over here and Ebenezer. And so there's where they take the Ark of the Covenant, they haul it across the mountains over to the battlefield here. The Ark is initially in this town, then they move it south, then they move it southwest, then east, then north. And this is kind of where they let it just kind of wander, and the cow makes it over here or to Beth Shemesh, and that's where they do the sacrifice, and then they bring the Ark of the Covenant over. So it kind of makes a big loop, but the Ark of the Covenant does not go back to Shiloh.
Mhm.
So, anywho, so if you are the Israelite people, you're getting attacked. Every few years you have a judge and then you don't have a judge and then your enemies attack again. You just had the Ark of the Covenant captured and returned. As the common people, what are you thinking your people needs in the form of leadership? What are some of the leadership needs that you think need to happen at this point in time? You just had a judge, but he had 2 corrupt sons, which kind of allowed for this capture. Any thoughts on like what the common person is thinking about the leadership situation at the time?
They need a king.
So why do they need a king?
Well, they need better authority. They need a better, obviously, army, because the army they had got defeated twice, so the army is a wreck, and their leadership also was a wreck. So they need some sort of authoritarian government, and the king would be the logical choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Clay?
And they need somebody right now. And Samuel is, as we have read, grown now, and he would be right in the right place at the right time for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the person who was kind of filling in the leadership hole is now dead. So yeah, you kind of, enemies are still on the horizon. We probably should fill this position really quick. We need some kind of authority figure that's maybe a bit stronger than what they've had in the past. Larry, you're suggesting king. Any other ideas of the things that would qualify someone for leadership in this particular situation?
Okay. And obviously they need a leader who's not old and blind.
Okay.
Eli was physically not, probably able to be an effective leader.
Mm-hmm. So another way to ask this is, what so far have we seen makes a bad leader that they have experienced?
Well, Eli, they've experienced, and Eli evidently wasn't too great at leadership or and many things. He was not a very good person. And I think that they need someone who is maybe militaristic, or at least one who can organize well, not somebody like Eli who was sort of ineffective. They needed somebody strong, somebody who is able to take charge, someone who can see right from wrong, someone who would follow God, or at least try to most of the time.
Okay.
And someone who would have mobility and could be visible to the people as someone young and strong.
Mm-hmm.
And Eli was more of a priest, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. He was a priest.
Yeah. So,
I think that the fragmentation of the whole situation is an issue. Get someone or some system that starts to have a little communication between the the different, I don't know if there's tribes or city states or whatever they are.
Mhm.
Because when something happens, they're kind of at a loss. They're on their own, or they've got to run around and try to find some help.
Mhm.
Mhm. So what I'm hearing from you is what would be helpful in this situation is you need someone young who can be visible, someone who can organize, and there needs to be a somewhat of a national identity, not just a tribal identity. A lot of the judges were, of course, of just like one or two tribes. So we need someone that can bring people together, create long-term plans, someone who is visibly out there. So not necessarily a priest who has priestly duties, but we need someone who is not a priest who can do that organizing, but they need to be able-bodied and be able to actually be out there. Young and strong were also words that you all use. So someone young, strong, organizing.
Hmm.
Anything else that you don't want in a king or I say king, in a leadership role?
Well, you want someone who's honest, so that would leave out being dishonest. You don't want somebody that's going to be lying to you or not
Mhm.
telling you the truth about situations, facing maybe challenges bravely.
Mhm.
And
Whether-
follow the law. You want him to follow the law.
you know,
Mhm.
right.
So you want someone that's not just good at organizing, you want someone that is upright and moral at the same time.
Mhm.
Mhm.
One other thing I'm going to add into the mix here is they're looking for stability. And so they want a way to not have to answer the leadership question over and over and over again. Because it seems like every time a judge dies, they fall into disorder and bad things happen. So how do we create a system that provides stability over the long term? So we are going to read the people's answer to this question. We will read Samuel's answer to this question. And next week, I want us to think about the pros and cons of the king being the answer. We're going to see some people are very pro-king, a lot of people that are anti-king. And if you want, make a pros cons list and tell me which argument you find more convincing. If you were an Israelite at the time, do you want a king or do you want a better system of judges?
Okay.
Can I call you back, Sylvia? I'm at a Bible study.
All right. All right. But with that, is there any final thoughts as we wrap up for today? All righty. Well, then let us pray. Gracious and loving God, as we are looking at what the qualities of leadership are in the Bible and what the people are seeking, we know that our nation is asking many similar questions, for we are a week out from choosing the leader of our nation and wondering what we need and what makes a good leader for us today. We know it's not necessarily the same qualities that the people of Israel were thinking about, but at the same time, some of our needs are the same. Looking for organization and stability, but also morality and what it means to bring people together. So guide us in the week ahead, in the conversations that we are having, in the events that will be unfolding. We pray especially for the United States this week, that you may guide everyone as we head to the polls, that we may be guided by your love and your vision of the kingdom of heaven, which we are working to bring about on this earth. So, and we also pray for this group, wherever their travels and take them. I ask that you be with them as their comforter and constant companion. So we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
Chris.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Take
See you
care,
next
everyone.
week.
Bye.
Week.